The room was dark, not the comfortable darkness of sleep, but the kind that pressed against your eyes, that made you wonder if morning would ever come. Evelyn Ashford sat by the window of the Buffalo Hotel third-floor corner room, watching the street below. Her hands rested in her lap, one palm up, one palm down. The knife lay between them. A small knife, kitchen knife, the kind a woman might use to peel apples or cut bread. The handle was wood worn smooth from years of use. She recognized it, had held it 1,000 times, had used it to prepare dinners that were never quite right, never quite on time, never quite enough to keep the peace. The blade caught what little moonlight pushed through the glass. 3 inches of steel, not much. But enough to change everything. Her right hand trembled. It had been trembling for 6 days now, ever since Kansas, ever since the blood. The trembling started in her fingers and spread up her arm like a slow poison. She'd tried to stop it, had pressed her hand flat against her thigh, had clenched her fist until her nails bit into her palm. Nothing worked. The tremor had a life of its own now, a constant reminder of what she'd done, what she'd had to do. Outside, the street was empty, Buffalo, Wyoming territory, in November. The kind of place where decent people locked their doors at sunset and didn't ask questions about strangers. The kind of place where a woman alone drew looks. Where a woman alone with a carpetbag and no husband drew more than looks. She'd learned that the hard way. The hotel clerk's eyes when she'd checked in. The slow sweep from her face to her hand, looking for a ring, finding nothing. The slight tightening of his mouth, the way he'd pushed the register toward her without a word. "Your name, Eve Ash," she'd said. The lie came easier each time she told it. "How long you staying, I don't know." That had been the wrong answer. She'd seen it in his eyes. Decent women knew how long they were staying. Decent women had plans, husbands, destinations. "I'll pay for tonight," she'd amended quickly. "And tomorrow. Cash." The clerk had taken her money, given her a key, pointed to the stairs. "3rd floor, corner room. Breakfast is at 7. You'll need to be out of the dining room by 8. She hadn't asked why, hadn't wanted to know. She'd taken the key and climbed the stairs and locked herself in this room and hadn't come out since. That was yesterday. Now it was 3 in the morning, and she was sitting by the window with a knife in her lap trying to decide what came next. Evie closed her eyes. The memory came whether she wanted it or not. It always did. Sharp, clear, inescapable. The bedroom in Topeka, the one with the blue wallpaper she'd chosen when they first moved in. When she'd still believed that choosing wallpaper mattered. When she'd still believed that making a house pretty would make a marriage happy. Thomas standing in the doorway, backlit by the hallway lamp. His shoulders filling the frame, blocking the exit, always blocking the exit. His voice, that particular tone he used, soft, almost gentle. The tone that meant run, that meant hide, that meant too late. "What do you think you're doing, Evelyn?" She'd been packing. "Just a few things. A dress. The blue one with the white collar. Some money she'd been hiding for months. Bills tucked into the flour jar. Coins in the sugar tin. Small amounts Thomas wouldn't notice, wouldn't miss. He'd found her anyway. Of course he had. Thomas always found her. She'd tried lying. Tried saying she was just reorganizing, putting away winter clothes, spring cleaning in November. The words had tumbled out, desperate and unconvincing. Thomas had smiled. That was always the worst part, the smile. The way it never reached his eyes, the way it meant he knew she was lying and was going to make her pay for it. He'd crossed the room in 4 steps. She'd counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then his hand was on her throat, not squeezing, not yet, just resting there, heavy, warm. His thumb pressed against her windpipe, not hard enough to cut off air, just hard enough to remind her how easy it would be. "You're not going anywhere." His voice had been so calm, so reasonable, like he was explaining something simple to a child. His other hand had gone to her hair. She'd worn it up that day, pinned in careful loops the way he liked, the way she always wore it now because it was easier than fighting about it. He'd grabbed the pins, pulled. Her scalp had screamed. She'd felt hair tearing, felt the pins scattering across the floor, heard them hit the wood like rain. She'd tried to twist away, tried to get to the door, but his grip had tightened, on her throat, on her hair, pulling her back, pulling her down. "You promised to obey me, Evelyn. Remember, in front of God and everyone, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part." The pressure on her throat had increased, cutting off air, cutting off sound, cutting off everything. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but claw at his hand. But Thomas was strong, Marshall strong, man strong, and she was nothing. Her vision had started to gray at the edges, spots appearing like stars. She'd thought, "This is it. This is how I die." In a bedroom with blue wallpaper, at the hands of the man who promised to love me. Then her hand had found something. The knife. She didn't remember reaching for it, didn't remember deciding. There was no thought, no plan, just instinct, just survival. The knife had been on the dresser, the one she'd used that morning to slice bread for his breakfast. She'd meant to take it back to the kitchen, had forgotten. Thank God she'd forgotten. Her fingers had closed around wood, smooth, familiar, real. She'd swung, up, forward. No technique, no aim, just desperation given steel. Resistance, then warmth, blood, so much blood. Thomas had staggered back. His hand had gone to his shoulder where the blade had gone in, where it was still in, buried to the hilt. His eyes. She would never forget his eyes. Not anger, not pain. Surprise, pure, complete surprise. Like he couldn't believe she had done it. Like he couldn't believe his wife, his property, his thing had finally fought back. "You." That was all he'd said. One word. Barely a whisper. Then he'd fallen, hit the floor hard. The impact had shaken the room, made the dresser rattle, made the lamp flicker. He didn't move. Evie had stood there, knife still in her hand. No, not in her hand anymore. In his shoulder. Still buried. Still dripping. Blood on her dress, on her hands, on the blue wallpaper she'd chosen with such care. She'd waited for him to get up, to grab her again, to finish what he'd started. He didn't move. She should have checked, should have seen if he was breathing, should have called for help, called for a doctor, called for anyone. But fear is a wild animal. It doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it just runs. So she ran, down the stairs, out the back door, into the night. She'd taken nothing but the carpet bag she'd already packed, the dress, the money, a few other things she couldn't even remember now. She'd run until her lungs burned, until her feet bled, until she was miles from Topeka, miles from the house with blue wallpaper, miles from Thomas. Then she'd kept running. Now 6 days later, sitting in a hotel room 300 miles from Topeka, Evie opened her eyes. The street below was still empty. The knife was still in her lap. She didn't know if Thomas was dead, didn't know if she was a widow or a murderer, didn't know if the law was looking for her or if Thomas had survived and was looking for her himself. Both options terrified her equally. The clock on the wall ticked, loud in the silence, each second a reminder that time was moving. That morning was coming, that she had to decide. Stay or go, hide or run, live or something else. 3 in the morning became 4, 4 became 5. At 6 she heard footsteps in the hall, doors opening, voices, the hotel waking up. She stood. Her legs protested, stiff from sitting, from the past 6 days of walking and riding and hiding. She walked to the small mirror above the wash basin. The woman looking back was a stranger, hollow eyes, dark circles underneath like bruises, sharp cheekbones, weight she'd lost without noticing. A face that looked older than 28, harder, more angular, and the bruise on her throat, still visible, fading from purple to yellow to green. A man's hand printed in skin, 5 fingers, a thumb, the map of her marriage. She touched it, winced, still tender. She pulled her collar higher, buttoned it to the top, checked the mirror again, better, almost invisible, almost. She picked up her carpet bag, checked the contents, the dress, the money, $12, some coins, the knife. She packed the knife carefully, wrapped it in the dress so the blade wouldn't cut through the fabric, closed the bag. By the time the sun rose, painting the Wyoming sky the color of old blood, Evelyn Ashford had already left the Buffalo Hotel. She walked. The town was waking up, Smoke from morning fires rose straight in the still air. The smell of coffee, of bacon, of bread baking. Normal smells. Smells that belonged to normal lives. Horses being led to water, their hooves clip-clopping on the hard-packed street. Men in overcoats heading to work, lunch pails in hand, faces still heavy with sleep. Women in shawls heading to market, baskets over their arms, talking in low voices, planning dinners, planning days. Normal people, living normal lives. Evie kept her head down, walked fast, didn't make eye contact. A few people stared anyway. A woman alone, walking with purpose, no husband, no destination that made sense. She felt their eyes, felt their judgment. Decent women didn't walk alone at dawn. Decent women had husbands to walk with, houses to walk to. She wasn't decent anymore. The thought should have hurt more than it did. At the edge of town, the buildings thinned, gave way to open land, scrub grass, and alkali dust. The road split. One path went north, one went south. Both went nowhere she knew. She stopped, looked north, looked south, tried to decide which direction held less danger, which direction Thomas was least likely to follow. Then she saw him, a man, maybe 200 yards ahead, standing next to a wagon loaded with supplies, canvas-covered, ropes securing the load. Around him, cattle. Evie counted automatically, a habit from her childhood on her father's farm, before Topeka, before Thomas, before everything. 80 head, maybe a few more. They moved slow, patient, grazing on the sparse grass like they had all the time in the world. The man was tall, wore a hat pulled low against the rising sun, a coat that had seen better years, brown, worn at the elbows, patched at one shoulder. He was checking his horse's cinch, methodical, careful, pulling the strap, testing the buckle, the movements of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Evie's legs hurt. Her feet hurt worse. Her boots had holes in the soles. She could feel every rock, every hard patch of ground. Each step sent pain shooting up through her heels. She needed work, needed money, needed something to do besides run. She walked toward him. The man looked up when she was still 50 feet away. His hand went to his hip, not fast, not drawing, just aware. Resting on what she now saw was a gun belt, a revolver holstered there. Well-worn leather. A man used to caution. Evie stopped, raised her hands slightly. Not surrender, just showing she was no threat, that she was unarmed, harmless. The man studied her. His face was hard to read under the hat brim, weathered skin, deep lines around the eyes, the kind you got from squinting into sun for years, jaw set like stone, unshaven, maybe 3 days of growth. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. The silence stretched. Finally, Evie found her voice. It came out smaller than she wanted, rougher, like she hadn't used it in days, which she hadn't. "I need work." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at her clothes, her carpet bag, her face. She knew what he saw. A woman alone, no ring, the bruise on her throat barely hidden by her collar, dirt on her dress, dust in her hair, desperation in her eyes. "What kind of work?" His voice was low, rough. Not unkind, but not welcoming either. The voice of a man who'd learned to be careful, to ask questions before offering help. "Whatever you need. I can cook, clean, sew. I grew up in Kansas. I know horses, I know cattle." The last part was mostly true. She had grown up around horses, had helped her father with the farm before he'd died, before she'd had to marry, before Thomas. The man stepped closer. 3 steps, close enough to see her clearly, close enough that she could see him too. Gray eyes, hard, but not cruel. A face that had seen things, done things, survived things. His eyes went to her throat, to the bruise. She resisted the urge to pull her collar higher, resisted the urge to turn away. He didn't comment. But she saw recognition there, understanding. The look of someone who knew what a man's hand on a woman's throat looked like. "I'm driving cattle to Cheyenne," he said. 6 weeks on the trail, maybe more depending on weather. It's hard work, cold work. Not fit for—" He stopped, reconsidered. His eyes flicked to her face again, to the determination he must have seen there. "Not fit for most people. I can do it." She said it fast, too fast. Desperation leaked through. She heard it in her own voice. Hated it. The man looked at the cattle, back at her. Calculating? Weighing? "You know livestock, I can learn." That's not an answer. Evie's fingers tightened on her carpet bag. The handle bit into her palm. She forced herself to breathe. To stay calm. To not be. I need this, please. I'll work hard. I won't complain. I'll do whatever you need. I need this. The words hung in the cold morning air. Raw. Honest. The man was quiet. The cattle shifted behind him, one load, low and mournful. The sound carried across the empty land, lonely, like it was calling for something it lost. Evie knew the feeling. What's your name? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Evie hesitated. Evelyn Ashford was a name connected to Kansas, to Topeka, to Thomas, to blood on blue wallpaper. Eve Ash. The lie came easy. Too easy. She'd been practicing it for 6 days. 6 days of being someone else. Someone who hadn't stabbed her husband. Someone who wasn't running. Someone who wasn't afraid. The man's eyes flickered, just slightly. He knew it was a lie. She could see that, could see the calculation behind his eyes, deciding whether to call her on it, deciding whether it mattered. Apparently it didn't. Nathaniel Collier. People call me Nate. He held out his hand, work roughened, scarred across the knuckles, the hand of a man who worked with his hands, who built things, fixed things, survived things. Evie took it. His grip was firm, calloused, warm despite the cold morning. The hand of someone who knew exactly who he was, what he was worth. She envied that. $1 a day, he said. Meals included. You do the job, you get paid. No exceptions. No special treatment. You can't keep up, you stay behind. You fall off your horse, you walk. You complain, you're done. Understood. Evie nodded. Yes. Nate released her hand, gestured to the cattle with his chin. You'll ride the left flank. Keep them from drifting. We move at dawn. Stop at noon for the heat. Move again at 3. Camp at dusk. Every day. For 6 weeks. You fall behind, you catch up on your own time. You can't keep up. You already said, I stay behind. Nate looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Sharp. There's another hand. Maggie, she'll show you the ropes. Show you what you need to know. Learn fast. I don't have time to teach twice. He turned, walked to his horse. A dun gelding, dusty brown, scars on its shoulders, old wounds healed over. He mounted in one smooth motion, settled into the saddle like he'd been born there. Evie stood there, carpetbag in hand, watching him ride to the front of the herd. She had a job. She had a purpose. She had 6 weeks to figure out what came next. For the first time in 6 days she could breathe. Then a voice behind her. So you're the new hand. Evie turned. A woman stood there. 30 maybe, younger than Evie had first thought. But her eyes were older. The eyes of someone who'd seen too much, survived too much. Strong build. Shoulders that came from work, not from ease, dark skin, hair in tight cornrows under a wide-brimmed hat. Practical. No nonsense. She sat on a bay horse, solid, patient. The horse stood perfectly still, waiting. The woman was not patient. Her eyes swept over Evie, top to bottom, assessing, judging. Evie nodded. I'm Maggie. Eve. The woman, Maggie, didn't offer her hand, didn't smile, just looked. You ever driven cattle before? No. You ever ridden for more than an hour? Evie hesitated. The truth was she'd ridden as a child, but that was years ago, before marriage, before Topeka, before her life had narrowed to 4 walls and a husband's fists. No. Maggie's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Might have been something else. Resignation, maybe, or pity. Then this will be interesting. She turned her horse. Come on, get a horse. We're moving in 10 minutes. She rode off without waiting, without looking back. Evie followed. The horses were tied to the wagon, 5 of them. Nate's dun gelding was already gone. That left 4. One was a gray gelding, too tall, too spirited for someone who hadn't ridden in years. One was a paint mare, young, skittish, ears back. One was a mule, practical but ornery. The last was an old mare, sway-backed, gentle-looking, brown with a white star on her forehead. Maggie rode back over. That one. She pointed to the old mare. Her name's Rosie. She knows the work better than most riders. Let her teach you. Evie approached slowly. The mare turned her head, looked at Evie with dark, patient eyes. Hi, Rosie. The mare huffed, went back to dozing. Evie had no saddle of her own. Maggie pointed to one hanging on the wagon. "That one's spare. Use it. You break it, you buy a new one." Evie lifted the saddle, heavier than she remembered. Her arms protested. 6 days of running, of hunger, of fear. She'd lost strength she didn't know she had. She carried the saddle to Rosie. The mare stood patient while Evie fumbled with straps and buckles. Her hands didn't remember how to do this, didn't remember which strap went where, didn't remember how tight the cinch should be. She tried, failed, tried again. Maggie watched, didn't help, didn't offer advice. Finally, Evie got it. Maybe, probably. The saddle seemed secure. She grabbed the horn, put her foot in the stirrup, pulled herself up. Her legs didn't quite know where to go. The saddle felt wrong. Too hard, too high. Nothing like she remembered. Rosie shifted. Evie grabbed the horn, held on. The mare stood still, waiting, patient as stone. Maggie rode up beside her. "Right on the left, keep them moving. Don't let them scatter. If one breaks away, go after it. Bring it back. Don't lose any. Nate counts every night. He'll know." Evie nodded. "How do I?" "You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, we're moving." Maggie rode off. Evie sat on Rosie. The mare started walking, following the herd, following Maggie, following instinct older than training. Evie held on. The first day was hell. No. Hell would have been easier. Hell would have had an end. This just kept going. The sun rose higher. The air warmed. Then got hot. Then got hotter. The cattle didn't want to move in a straight line. They wanted to drift, to stop and graze, to wander off in groups of 3 or 4. Every time Evie thought she had them going the right direction, one would veer off. She'd try to ride after it, try to cut it off. But Rosie moved slow, patient, like she knew there was no rush, like she'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly how it would end. By the time Evie got to one stray, 2 more would drift the other way. It was impossible. By noon her back ached, her thighs burned, her hands were cramped from gripping the reins too tight. The leather had rubbed blisters into her palms. She could feel them forming, feel the skin separating, feel the raw flesh underneath. Nate called a halt. The cattle stopped, started grazing. The horses stood patient. Evie tried to dismount. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. They'd forgotten how to work, how to hold her weight. She slid off Rosie. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the saddle, stood there shaking. Maggie rode past. First day's the hardest. She said it without looking back, like it was a law of nature, like gravity, like death. Evie wanted to believe her. They ate. Jerky and hardtack, water from canteens. The jerky was tough as leather. The hardtack was harder. Evie's stomach churned, but she forced the food down, chewed until her jaw ached, swallowed, repeated. She needed the energy. Nate sat apart, eating in silence, not looking at anyone, not speaking. Maggie sat nearby, also silent, also not looking. Evie sat alone, feeling like an intruder, like someone who didn't belong, which she didn't. At 3, they started again. The afternoon was worse than the morning. The sun beat down, no clouds, no shade. Oh, just relentless heat and dust and cattle that refused to cooperate. One cow, a red brindle with a white face, kept breaking away, again and again. Evie would chase it down, bring it back. 10 minutes later, it would do it again. By the 4th time, Evie wanted to cry. By the 5th, she wanted to quit. By the 6th, she was too tired to want anything. When the sun finally touched the horizon, turning the sky blood red, Nate called a halt. Evie slid off Rosie. This time her legs gave out completely. She hit the ground, caught herself on her hands, knelt there in the dirt. Maggie rode past. "You'll get stronger." Evie wasn't sure she believed that either. That night they made camp. Nate built a fire, quick, efficient. No wasted motion. He had it going in minutes. Maggie unpacked supplies from the wagon, pulled out a pot, some beans, salt pork, started cooking. Evie stood there, useless, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to help. "Unsaddle your horse," Nate's voice. Not unkind, just stating the obvious. Evie walked to Rosie. The mare stood patient, while Evie fumbled with straps and buckles. Everything took 3 times longer than it should. Her hands shook. From exhaustion, from pain, from everything. When she finally got the saddle off, she nearly dropped it, caught it, staggered under the weight, set it on the ground. Maggie was watching. Her expression was unreadable. "You'll get faster," Evie nodded. Didn't trust her voice. They ate. Beans from a pot, more hardtack, coffee so strong it tasted like dirt. Evie sat by the fire. Every muscle screamed. She wanted to lie down, to sleep, to never move again. Instead, she watched Nate. He moved with economy. No wasted motion, poured coffee, checked the horses, walked a slow circle around the cattle, counting under his breath. Evie watched him count, watched his lips move, watched him point at different animals, making sure they were all there, all accounted for. When he came back, he sat across the fire from her. The silence stretched, comfortable for him, uncomfortable for her. Then Maggie spoke. "You from Kansas." It wasn't really a question, more like confirmation, like she already knew. Evie nodded. "What brings you to Wyoming?" "Everything." "Nothing." Blood on her hands and fear in her throat, and a husband who might be dead or might be hunting her. Needed a change. Maggie's eyes were sharp, too sharp, like they could see through lies. Most people who need a change don't take jobs driving cattle in November. Evie didn't answer. Nate stood, walked to his bedroll, lay down with his back to the fire. Maggie watched him go, then looked at Evie. "He doesn't ask questions, but I do. So I'll ask once, and you don't have to answer, but know that I'm asking." She paused. "Who are you running from?" Evie's throat tightened. The question hung in the air like smoke. Maggie didn't wait for an answer. She stood, walked to her own bedroll. Before lying down, she said one more thing. "Don't worry, we're all running from something." Evie sat alone by the fire. The flames were dying now, embers glowing. She should bank them, should go to sleep, should rest. Instead, she looked at her hands, blisters on both palms, raw, seeping, the beginning of calluses forming underneath. She looked at the cattle, 80 head, patient, grazing in the darkness. She looked at Nate, asleep, or pretending to be. She looked at Maggie, still, silent. For the first time in 6 days, Evelyn Ashford was not alone. And that was something. The second week found its rhythm, not an easy rhythm, not a comfortable one, but a rhythm nonetheless. The kind that comes from repetition, from necessity, from survival. Evie learned, not quickly but steadily. She learned which cattle were troublemakers, the ones that drifted at every opportunity, the ones that followed the herd easy, the ones that needed constant watching. She learned that the red brindle, the one that kept breaking away, wasn't being difficult. It was being a mother, following a calf that had been separated from its own mother. Once Evie reunited them, the brindle stopped running, settled, became one of the easiest cattle to manage. She learned that Rosie was smarter than she looked, that the old mare knew the work better than any human could teach, that if Evie relaxed and let the horse work, things went easier, smoother, like the mare was teaching her instead of the other way around. She learned to read the land, to see water before they reached it, to spot good grazing, to find shelter from wind, small things, but things that mattered. And she learned that Maggie's silences were not hostile, just cautious. The older woman was watching, evaluating, deciding whether Evie was worth the effort of training, whether she'd quit, whether she'd survive. By the end of the first week, something had shifted. Maggie started correcting her, small things, the way she sat in the saddle, the way she held the reins, the way she approached a stray cow. Not here, over there. Come at them from the side, not straight on. You'll spook them. Evie listened, learned, tried not to make the same mistake twice. And she learned that Nate was a man of patterns. Coffee before dawn, always black, always in the same battered tin cup. The cup was dented on one side, had been for years judging by the wear, but he never replaced it, never used a different one. He walked the herd 3 times a day, noon, dusk, before bed, always counting, always making sure. His lips moved as he counted, pointing at different animals, making mental notes. At night he cleaned his rifle. Every night. Even if he hadn't fired it, the motions were automatic, smooth, oil and cloth and careful attention. He whistled while he worked, not loudly, just under his breath. Old songs Evie didn't recognize, melancholy tunes that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. Songs about loss, about loneliness, about things that could never be recovered. On the 8th night something changed. Evie was cleaning the supper pot, scrubbing it with sand and a rag. The work was mindless, soothing almost. Her hands had stopped shaking. The blisters from the first few days had hardened into calluses. The pain was still there, but duller now. Manageable. She heard footsteps, looked up. Nate stood at the edge of the firelight, not looking at her, looking at the cattle. They were settled for the night, dark shapes in the darkness, breathing in rhythm. "You did good today." 5 words, the first real acknowledgement he'd given her. Evie's chest tightened. Something warm spread through her, pride maybe, or just relief that she wasn't failing, that she was worth the $1 a day he was paying her. "Thank you," Nate nodded. Started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. The bruises, they're fading. Evie's hand went to her throat. Automatic. The bruises were almost gone now, yellowed ghosts. In another week, they'd be invisible, like they'd never been there at all. But they had been there, and Nate had noticed them from the beginning, had known what they meant, who had put them there. Yes. Nate turned, looked at her directly. His eyes were gray in the firelight, hard, but not unkind. "Whoever put them there. He's still looking for you?" The question hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, full of implications. Evie could lie, could say no, could pretend Thomas was dead or didn't care or had moved on, but Nate's eyes were steady, not judging, just asking. And something in his face told her he'd know if she lied. "I don't know." Honest answer, maybe the first honest thing she'd said since Kansas, since she'd become Eve Ash instead of Evelyn Ashford. Nate nodded, like that was answer enough. To his bedroll. "Lay down." Pulled his to his bedroll. "Lay down." Pulled his blanket up. Evie sat there, pot in her hands, heart in her throat. The fire crackled. Sparks rose and died. She believed him. That was the strange part. She'd known this man for 8 days, barely knew his last name, barely knew anything about him except that he paid fair and worked hard and didn't ask questions. But she believed him. That night she slept better than she had in weeks. On the 11th day they found the calf. It was morning. The herd was moving slow, grazing as they walked. The sun was climbing, but the air was still cold. Evie could see her breath, see Rosie's breath rising in clouds. A heifer at the back started lowing, different sound than the usual low rumble, higher, more urgent, distressed. Evie rode back to check. The heifer was standing still. The herd flowed around her like water around a stone. At her feet something small, a calf, newborn, still wet from birth, the membrane still clinging to parts of its body. It lay curled tight, too small, ribs showing through damp hide. Evie dismounted, knelt in the dirt. The calf's eyes were open, but filmed over, not seeing, not focusing. Its breathing was shallow, irregular. Each breath seemed to take enormous effort. She put her hand on its neck. The heartbeat under her palm was weak, fluttering like a bird's wing. Maggie rode up, looked down. Her face showed nothing, born too small. Mothers already rejected it. Evie looked at the heifer. The cow was standing apart, not licking the calf, not nosing it, not showing any of the behaviors a mother should show, just standing, waiting for the herd to move on so she could follow. "We can't just leave it." Maggie's face was carefully neutral. "We can't carry it either. Best to let nature take its course. It happens, more often than you'd think." Evie looked at the calf. Its chest rose and fell, fighting to breathe, fighting to live. Nature's cruel. Maggie's expression softened, just slightly. "Yes, it is." Nate rode over, looked at the calf, at Evie, at the heifer standing apart. "We need to move. Schedule's tight. Can't afford to lose time." Evie stood, faced him, saw her opening and took it. "I'll carry it." Nate's eyebrows rose. The first real expression she'd seen from him. "It weighs 60 pounds. We've got 12 miles before we stop. You can't carry that." "I'll manage." "Evie?" His voice held a warning, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe, or respect. "You'll slow us down. You'll hurt yourself. And it'll probably die anyway. Most of them do when they're born that small. Then it'll die knowing someone tried." They stared at each other. The morning sun behind Nate turned him into a silhouette. Evie couldn't see his expression, didn't need to. She knew what he was thinking. This is stupid. This is impractical. This won't work. But she also knew something else. Something she'd learned watching him over the past 10 days. Nate Collier respected stubbornness, respected people who didn't quit, who didn't take the easy way out. "All right," he said finally. "Your calf, your responsibility. It dies, you deal with it. You fall behind, you catch up on your own time." "Understood," Evie nodded. "Yes." Nate rode off, didn't look back. Maggie stayed, watched Evie kneel again, slip her arms under the calf, lift. It was heavier than she expected, dense, all bone and wet hide and dead weight. Its head lolled against her chest, warm, alive, fighting. Evie straightened, staggered. Her legs protested, her arms screamed. But she caught her balance, held on. Maggie reached into her saddlebag, pulled out a length of rope. "Make a sling. It'll be easier. Won't have to use your arms as much." Evie took the rope, fashioned a sling around her shoulders, the way she'd seen women carry babies back in Kansas, the way her own mother had carried her youngest brother when Evie was small. She settled the calf against her chest. Its knobby legs dangled against her skirt. Its breathing came warm and ragged against her collarbone. "Thank you." Maggie nodded. Her face was still neutral, but something in her eyes had changed, softened. "Don't thank me yet. You've got 12 miles to walk." Then she rode off. The herd moved on. Evie walked. Rosie plodded beside her, patient. The mare seemed to understand, seemed to know that this was important, that this mattered. Within 100 yards, Evie's arms burned. The sling helped, took some of the weight off her shoulders instead of her arms, but it didn't make the calf light, didn't make the miles shorter. Within a quarter mile, she couldn't feel her arms anymore. They'd gone numb. Just weight, just pressure, just the feeling of something alive pressed against her chest. Within a half-mile, every step was agony. Her feet hurt, her legs hurt, her back hurt, everything hurt. But she kept walking. The calf's breathing came ragged against her collarbone. She could feel each inhale, each exhale, could feel its small heart beating against her ribs. Fast, too fast. The heart of something fighting to survive. "Keep going," she whispered, to the calf, to herself, to anyone who would listen. "Keep going. Don't quit. Don't give up." The words became a rhythm, a prayer, a promise. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down. Wyoming in November was cold at night. But during the day, the sun was relentless. No clouds, no shade, just endless sky and endless earth and endless walking. Sweat ran down Evie's back, soaked through her dress. The calf's wet hide dampened her chest. She couldn't tell where she ended, and it began. Dust coated her throat. Each breath was harder than the last. She'd run out of water an hour ago, hadn't wanted to stop, hadn't wanted to slow down, hadn't wanted to give Nate a reason to tell her to leave the calf behind. She kept walking. Rosie plodded beside her. The mare's presence was comforting, solid, real. A reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Ahead, Nate rode point. He didn't look back. But she knew he was aware, knew he was listening, knew he was keeping track. Behind Maggie rode Drag, keeping the stragglers moving. Every so often, Evie would hear her voice, low, steady, talking to the cattle like they were children. "Come on now, keep moving, not much farther." Evie wondered if Maggie was talking to her too, sending encouragement across the distance. The sun reached its peak, started its slow descent toward the horizon. Evie's vision started to blur at the edges. Gray creeping in like fog. Her legs moved automatically now. One step, another, one step, another. She stopped thinking about the calf, stopped thinking about anything except the next step, the next breath, the next moment. Then she heard it. Nate's voice, calling the halt. She looked up, saw the mesquite trees ahead, scraggly. Not much, but shade. Blessed shade. She stumbled the last 100 yards, nearly fell twice, caught herself, kept going. At noon, Nate called a halt. Evie set the calf down in the shade of the largest mesquite. Her arms hung useless at her sides, numb, dead weight. Her shoulders screamed. Her back felt like it was on fire. The heifer pushed past her, nosing the calf, licking it clean, the roughness of the tongue stimulating, encouraging. The calf struggled, got its front legs under it, pushed, fell. The legs splayed out wrong, too weak to hold. Tried again. This time it stood, shaking, wobbling, like a newborn fawn, but standing. It took 3 tries to find the udder, bumped into the heifer's leg, bumped into her belly, finally found the teat, latched on, nursed. Evie sat in the dirt, watched, tears running down her face. She didn't wipe them away, didn't care. Maggie walked over, handed her a canteen. Drink. Evie drank. The water was warm, tasted like leather and dust. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. That was either very brave or very stupid, Maggie said. Evie wiped her mouth, looked up. Can't it be both? Maggie's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, the first real smile Evie had seen from her. Yes, I suppose it can. That evening, Nate divided the jerky, like he did every night, portion by portion, fair and equal. Except tonight Evie's piece was bigger than usual, not by much, but enough to notice. He didn't say anything. She didn't thank him, but something had shifted between them, small as the difference between 2 pieces of dried meat, and just as real. The calf survived the night, and the next night, and the one after that. By the end of the 2nd week it was walking on its own, following the heifer, following Rosie. Sometimes it would trot up to Evie, nuzzle her hand, looking for something. Comfort maybe, or gratitude, or just recognition. By the 3rd week it was running, short bursts, calf joy, spring-legged and graceless, kicking up its heels, celebrating life for no reason except the joy of being alive. Evie watched it play, felt something in her chest that might have been pride, might have been hope, might have been the first good thing she'd felt since Kansas. On the 18th night, Maggie sat down beside her at the fire. They'd finished eating. Nate was making his evening rounds. The cattle were quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered, a conversation in the darkness. Maggie was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Sparks rose and died. The night pressed in. Finally she spoke. There's something you should know. Evie looked at her. Maggie's face was serious, more serious than usual. When we were in Buffalo, before we left, I heard some men talking. Evie's stomach dropped. The warmth from the fire suddenly felt very far away. They were asking about a woman, traveling alone, brown hair, late 20s, might be using a different name. The fire crackled. The silence stretched. What did you tell them? Evie's voice came out steady. Barely. Nothing. I don't know you, can't help them. Maggie paused, looked at Evie directly. But they're looking, and they'll keep looking. Men like that don't give up easy. Evie's hands trembled. She clasped them together, tight enough that her knuckles went white. Who were they? One was dressed like a lawman, badge and everything. The other, I don't know. But they had that look, the kind men get when they're hunting something, when they're getting paid to find it. The coyote called again. Closer this time. Thank you for telling me. Maggie nodded. What did you do? Back in Kansas, Evie looked at the fire, at the flames dancing, at the shadows they cast. She could lie, could make up a story, could be Eve Ash instead of Evelyn Ashford, but Maggie had just shown her a kindness, a warning. The least Evie could do was be honest. I survived. Maggie was quiet. Then she stood. We all do what we have to. Just remember that. She walked to her bedroll. Evie sat alone by the fire. Her mind raced. Thomas was alive. Had to be. Dead men didn't send hunters. Dead men didn't hire lawmen to ask questions in towns 300 miles away. He was looking for her, and he was getting closer. She should leave. Should take her $18 in wages and disappear. Head north or south or west. Anywhere but here. But something stopped her. The calf. The work. The way Nate had looked at her when she refused to leave the newborn behind. The way Maggie had started showing her how to really ride, how to really see the cattle, how to survive. The way all of this felt like something, like purpose, like maybe for the first time in 8 years, her life was her own. She was still sitting there when Nate came back. He poured himself coffee, sat across from her. The silence between them was comfortable now, not heavy, just there. Finally, Evie spoke. Can I ask you something? Nate looked up, nodded. When you hired me, did you know I was running? Nate was quiet. Then he set down his coffee. Yes? How you had that look, the one people get when they're always watching over their shoulder, when they're expecting someone to find them. He paused. Plus the bruises, the way you flinched when I moved too fast, the way you lied about your name. Evie's cheeks burned. She'd thought she'd been careful, thought she'd hidden it well. So why did you hire me? Because running isn't the same as being guilty. The words sat between them. Heavy. True. What if I am guilty, I mean? Nate looked at her, really looked, his gray eyes steady. Then I figure you had your reasons. Evie's eyes burned. She blinked hard, forced the tears back. The man who's looking for me, he's my husband. Nate didn't react, just waited. He hurt me for years, and I fought back. I don't know if he's alive. Don't know if I killed him or if he survived. But he's looking, and I don't know what to do. Nate picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured. How far to Cheyenne? Evie blinked. What, how far to Cheyenne? From here. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Nate nodded. That's 4 weeks you're moving. 4 weeks you're harder to find. 4 weeks to figure out what comes next. But when we get there, you'll have wages. You'll have options. And if your husband shows up before then, he paused, then he'll have to go through all of us. Evie stared at him. Why are you helping me? Nate looked into the fire. His face was shadowed. Hard to read. Because a long time ago someone didn't help me when I needed it. And I've been paying for that ever since. He stood, walked to his bedroll, stopped halfway. Get some sleep, Eve, or Evelyn, or whatever your real name is. We've got a long road ahead. He lay down, pulled his blanket up. Evie sat by the fire. The flames were dying now. Embers glowing red and orange. She should bank them, should go to sleep. Instead, she looked up at the night sky. Stars scattered across the darkness. More stars than she'd ever seen in Topeka. More stars than she'd thought existed. Bright and cold and beautiful. Somewhere out there, Thomas was hunting. Somewhere out there, the law was asking questions. Somewhere out there, her old life was chasing her new one. But here right now, she had a job. Had people who, if not quite friends, were at least allies. Had a calf that was alive because she'd refused to let it die. Had a chance. She stood, banked the fire, walked to her bedroll. Tomorrow they would ride. The day after that they would ride again. For 3 more weeks they would move forward, away from Kansas, away from Thomas, towards something she couldn't quite name yet. But for the first time since she'd left that bedroom with blood on her hands, Evelyn Ashford fell asleep without trembling. The knife stayed in her bag. The bruises faded to nothing. And the woman who called herself Eve Ash learned that sometimes survival isn't about running faster. Sometimes it's about finding people who will stand with you when the running stops. The 3rd week began with fog. It rolled in from the north just before dawn, thick, white, dense as wool. The kind that swallowed sound and distance. The kind that made the familiar strange and the strange invisible. Evie woke to it, opened her eyes to whiteness pressing against her face. For a moment she panicked, thought she'd gone blind, thought something had happened in the night. Then she heard the cattle, the low rumble of 80 animals breathing, shifting, moving through the fog like ghosts. She sat up. Her bedroll was damp. Everything was damp. The fog had settled over everything like a wet blanket. Nate was already up. She could hear him moving, saddling his horse, the clink of metal, the creak of leather. Sounds magnified by the fog. "We're moving," he called. "Can't see 10 feet, but we're moving anyway. Stay close. Don't lose sight of the herd." Evie stood. Her joints protested. 3 weeks of riding had made her stronger, but mornings were still hard, still painful. She rolled her bedroll, saddled Rosie. The mare stood patient as stone, used to this, used to fog and cold and early mornings. They moved through the whiteness. Evie rode close to the herd, so close she could have reached out and touched the nearest cow. The cattle were nervous, moving tighter together than usual. The fog spooked them. It spooked Evie too. She couldn't see Nate, couldn't see Maggie, could only hear them. Voices in the whiteness, calling to each other, checking positions. Left flank clear, right flank good. Point moving steady. The voices were lifelines, proof that she wasn't alone, that the world still existed beyond the white. Rosie knew the way, even when Evie couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The mare's ears swiveled, listening, always listening, following sounds Evie couldn't hear, following instincts older than training. By mid-morning, the fog burned off, left the world sharp and clear, the kind of clarity that hurt the eyes after so much softness. Colors were brighter, sounds were louder. Everything felt too real, too present. Nate called a halt at a creek, real running water. First they'd seen in days. The cattle pushed forward, eager, thirsty. They'd been smelling it for miles. Evie dismounted, led Rosie to the bank, let her drink. The water was clear, cold, running over smooth stones worn down by centuries of current. Maggie rode up beside her, dismounted. Her horse, a gray gelding named Smoke, lowered his head to the water, drank deep. "You're getting better." Maggie said it without looking at her, just a statement, not praise, not criticism, just fact. Evie glanced over. Better at what? At this, all of it. 3 weeks ago you could barely stay in the saddle. Now you ride like you were born to it. Evie felt warmth in her chest, pride maybe, or just relief that she wasn't failing, that the blisters and pain and exhaustion had meant something. "You're a good teacher," Maggie snorted, a sound that might have been amusement or dismissal. "I'm not teaching, just not letting you die. There's a difference." But there was something in her voice, something softer than the words suggested, something that sounded almost like friendship. They stood there, horses drinking, water running over stones. The sound was ancient, eternal. The sound of water that had been running before they were born and would keep running long after they were gone. Maggie spoke again, her voice quieter now, more careful. "I grew up on a farm, East Texas. Cotton farm." Evie waited, didn't interrupt, sensed this was important, sensed Maggie didn't share easily. "My daddy was a freedman, saved up for years, every penny, every dollar, bought 40 acres, built a house, a real house, not a shack, not a lean-to, a house with wood floors, glass windows, a porch." She paused. The water kept running. The horses kept drinking. He was proud of that house, proud of those 40 acres, proud that he'd done it himself, that he'd earned it. Evie heard the past tense, knew what was coming, but she didn't interrupt. White folks didn't like it, didn't like seeing a black man with land, with pride, with something they thought he shouldn't have. Maggie's voice went flat, emotionless, like she was reciting facts from a history book, not telling her own story. They came at night. Maybe 20 of them, hooded, masked, burned the cotton, burned the barn, burned the house. My daddy tried to stop them, tried to save what he'd built. She stopped, swallowed hard. They hung him from the oak tree in the front yard. Made my mama watch. Made me watch. I was 12 years old. The water kept running. The horses kept drinking. The world kept moving, indifferent to horror, indifferent to grief. After that we had nothing. The land was still ours legally, but we couldn't work it, couldn't afford to rebuild, couldn't stay. Evie's throat was tight. She didn't speak, didn't trust her voice. Mama worked herself to death in someone else's fields, picking someone else's cotton, making someone else rich. She died when I was 16, just gave up, stopped eating, stopped caring, stopped fighting. Maggie pulled Smoke's head up. Water dripped from his muzzle. I married young, too young. A good man named Samuel. He worked hard, saved money. We moved to a different county, tried to start over, tried to build what my daddy had built. Her voice went even flatter. They lynched him too, said he'd looked at a white woman wrong. He hadn't. He'd just been walking to work. But that didn't matter. The truth never matters when they've already decided. Evie found her voice. It came out hoarse. "I'm sorry." Maggie finally looked at her. Her eyes were hard, but not cold, just tired. "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't bring anyone back. Sorry doesn't stop it from happening again." She turned back to the water. "After Samuel died, I took Isaiah and ran. My little brother, the only family I had left. He was just 15. We went north, Kansas first, then Missouri, then here. Kept moving, because the only way we survive is to keep moving." "Why did you tell me this?" Maggie mounted her horse, looked down at Evie. "Because you think you're the only one running from something evil. You're not. Evil's everywhere. The question isn't whether it'll find you. The question is what you do when it does. She paused. You carried that calf for 12 miles. You didn't quit, even when it hurt, even when it seemed impossible. That tells me something about who you are. When the time comes, I hope you remember it too. Maggie rode off, left Evie standing by the creek. The water ran, the sun climbed, and something inside Evie shifted, settled. She wasn't alone in this. Maybe she never had been. 4 days later, they reached a town, not much of one. 10 buildings scattered along a dirt road, maybe 12 if you counted the outhouses, a general store, a saloon with a crooked sign, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly left, like it was tired, like it might fall over any day now. The kind of place that existed only because the railroad needed water stops. The kind of place people passed through but didn't stay. Nate reined in at the edge of town, looked at the buildings, calculating. We need supplies. Coffee's almost out. Salt too. Flour. Some bacon if they have it. He glanced at Maggie and Evie. I'll go. You two stay with the herd. Maggie's jaw tightened. Evie had learned to read that sign. Anger. Carefully controlled. I can get supplies. Nate looked at her. His face was neutral, but his eyes were understanding. I know you can. Then let me. It was more than a request. It was a challenge, a test, a question about trust and respect and whether Nate saw her as an equal or just as hired help. Nate was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched. Then he nodded. All right, take Evie with you. They rode into town together, side by side. Maggie sat straight in her saddle, head high, eyes forward, refusing to bow, refusing to shrink. But Evie could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand rested near her knife, the way her eyes tracked every person on the street, looking for threats, looking for danger, always looking. They tied their horses outside the general store. The building was weathered, gray wood, paint peeling in long strips. A sign above the door read, Miller's Goods in faded letters. Inside the store was dim, smelled like tobacco and lamp oil and something sweet Evie couldn't identify. Shelves lined the walls. Canned goods, bolts of fabric, tools, ammunition, everything a frontier town might need. A man stood behind the counter, middle-aged, balding, soft in the middle, the kind of soft that came from standing behind a counter instead of working with his hands. He looked up when they entered. His eyes went to Maggie first, then to Evie, back to Maggie. His face changed, hardened, closed like a door slamming shut. We're not open. It was a lie. The door had been unlocked. Other customers browsed the aisles, a woman examining fabric, a man looking at tools. Maggie's voice was level, carefully controlled. The sign says you're open until 5. It's 3:30. The man crossed his arms over his soft belly. I said we're not open. Evie felt heat rise in her chest, anger, sharp and bright, and clean. We need supplies. We can pay. Cash. The man didn't even look at her, kept his eyes on Maggie. I don't serve her kind. The words hung in the air, ugly, naked in their hatred. Maggie's face didn't change, but Evie saw her hand tighten on the counter edge, saw the knuckles go white, saw the small tremor that ran through her. This wasn't new for Maggie, this was familiar, expected, just another cruelty in a lifetime of cruelties. Evie opened her mouth to argue, to shame the man, to do something. Then the door opened behind them. Nate walked in. He didn't say anything, didn't need to, just walked to the counter with slow, deliberate steps, stood beside Maggie, put a hand on the wood, calm, steady. His face was neutral, but his eyes were cold. Is there a problem? The shopkeeper shifted. Some of his confidence wavered. I was just telling these women that I'm closed. Nate looked around the store, at the other customers, at the open shelves, at the lamp burning on the counter. Looks open to me. The shopkeeper's face reddened. Look, mister, I don't know who you are, but I run this store how I see fit, and I don't serve coloreds, that's my right. Nate pulled out a leather wallet, old, worn. He set it on the counter, opened it. Inside were bills, more than a few. I need supplies, Nate said. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Coffee, 20 pounds, salt, 10 pounds, flour, 50 pounds, bacon if you have it. Whatever's not rancid. Sugar? Dried beans? He paused. Let the silence build. And she's with me. He nodded toward Maggie. She works for me, has for 3 weeks now. Best hand I've ever hired. Now, are you going to sell me what I need? Or do I take my money to the next town? The shopkeeper looked at the money, at Nate, at Maggie, at the other customers who were now watching, listening. His greed warred with his prejudice. Greed won. Fine. But she waits outside. Nate's jaw tightened. For a moment Evie thought he might hit the man, thought she might see violence in those calm gray eyes. Instead, he picked up his wallet, closed it, put it away. Never mind. We'll go elsewhere. He turned. Maggie and Evie followed. Outside, Maggie stopped him, her hand on his arm. You didn't have to do that. Nate kept walking toward the horses. Yes, I did. Maggie grabbed his arm harder, made him stop, made him look at her. Why? Because it's not right. And just because something's legal doesn't mean it's just. They stared at each other. Something passed between them. Understanding, respect, recognition of shared principles. Maggie released his arm. Her voice was quiet. Thank you. Nate nodded once, then mounted his horse. They rode 18 miles south to the next town, got their supplies without incident, but the moment stayed with Evie. The way Nate had stood up, the way he'd walked away from convenience in favor of principle, the way he'd chosen dignity over ease. That night around the fire she watched him differently, not as her employer, not as the man who'd given her a chance when she needed it most, but as someone worth knowing, someone worth trusting, someone who might be worth more than that. The 4th week brought routine, but routine with depth now, with layers, with small intimacies that came from living close to people, from sharing space and work and silence. Evie learned that Nate whistled while he worked, not loudly, just under his breath, old songs she didn't recognize, melancholy tunes that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, songs about loss and longing and things that couldn't be recovered. She learned that Maggie talked to the cattle, gave them names only she knew, called them sweetheart and darling and honey, called them things she probably never called people, used tenderness reserved only for animals that couldn't judge her for it. She learned that the calf she'd saved, the one that had nearly died, had become the herd favorite. The other cattle gave it space, protected it, let it drink first, let it graze in the best spots, like they knew it was special, like they knew it had been given a second chance. And she learned that she was changing. Her hands were no longer soft, calluses had formed, thick and hard. Her palms were tough as leather now. She could grip reins all day without pain, could work rope without blisters. Her arms had muscle where there had been none. She could lift saddles easily now, could carry water buckets, could do work that would have been impossible a month ago. Her face had tanned despite her bonnet. Her hair, which she'd once kept carefully pinned and curled, now hung in a simple braid down her back. Practical, functional, no nonsense. She looked in a pocket mirror one evening, barely recognized herself. The woman looking back was stronger, harder, leaner, more angular, but also somehow more real, more herself than she'd been in years, maybe ever. On the 23rd night it rained, not hard, just a steady drizzle that came with dusk and showed no signs of stopping. The fire sputtered and died, despite Nate's best efforts. They couldn't relight it. Everything was too wet. Maggie found a rock overhang. Not quite a cave, just a shelter carved by wind and water over centuries, 8 feet deep, maybe 12 feet wide, enough for 3 people in their gear if they squeezed close. They huddled inside, listening to the rain, watching it turn the world silver in the last light. Nate sat against the back wall. Evie sat to his left, Maggie to his right, close, closer than they usually got, closer than was strictly necessary. Heat pooled between them, body heat. The warmth of 3 people in a small space. Nobody spoke. The rain fell, steady, hypnotic, a sound that filled the silence, that made conversation unnecessary. Evie became aware of Nate's breathing, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his shoulder almost touched hers. Almost, not quite. If she moved an inch, they'd be touching. She didn't move, neither did he. But the air between them hummed with possibility, with awareness, with something unnamed but undeniable. Maggie stood abruptly, walked to the edge of the overhang, looked out at the rain. I'm going to check the horses, make sure they're not spooked by the storm. She didn't wait for a response, just walked out into the drizzle, disappeared into the gray wetness. Evie and Nate sat alone. The silence was different now, charged, heavy with things unsaid. Evie could feel her pulse in her throat, in her wrists, in her chest, could hear it in her ears, louder than the rain. Nate shifted. His shoulder brushed hers. The contact was electric, sent sparks racing down her arm, made her breath catch. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. Evie turned her head, looked at him. He was already looking at her. His eyes were dark in the dim light, unreadable. But his breathing had changed, faster, shallower, like he was running even though he was sitting still. She should say something, should break the tension, should move away. She didn't. Nate's hand moved, slow, careful, like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. His fingers found hers, rough, calloused, warm despite the cold. He laced his fingers through hers. Her breath caught, stopped, started again. Evie, her real name. Not Eve, not the lie she'd been telling. He knew, had always known. Yes, her voice came out barely a whisper. I need to tell you something. She waited, didn't speak, didn't breathe. My wife, Sarah. I told you she died in childbirth. That's not the whole truth. Evie's heart hammered. She could feel it, could hear it. The baby did die. 3 days old, never took a proper breath, never opened his eyes, never made a sound except one small cry when he was born. Then nothing. His voice cracked on the words. We buried him under the cottonwood tree on our land. Made a small cross, carved his name, Samuel, named him after my father. He stopped, swallowed hard. She could see his throat work. Sarah, she couldn't bear it, the loss, the grief. It was too much. I tried to help her, tried to be there, tried to do everything right. But she was drowning, and I didn't know how to save her. Evie's fingers tightened on his. She didn't speak, just listened. One morning I woke up. She wasn't in bed. I looked for her, called for her, finally found her. He stopped again, this time for longer, in the barn. She'd hung herself from the rafter, used rope we'd bought for the new fence. She'd planned it, waited until I was asleep, waited until she knew I wouldn't stop her. Evie's hand tightened on his, hard enough to hurt, but he didn't pull away. I cut her down, tried to bring her back, breathed air into her lungs, pressed on her chest. Did everything I'd seen doctors do, but she was already gone, already cold. The rain kept falling. The world kept turning. The people in town, they blamed me. Said I must have driven her to it. Said a good husband would have prevented it. Said I must have been cruel. Must have been neglectful. Must have been something. His voice went hard. Maybe they were right. No. Evie said it fierce. Certain. The first word she'd spoken. No. You didn't kill her. Grief killed her. Pain killed her. Loss killed her. Not you. Nate looked at her. His eyes were wet. She'd never seen him cry, never seen him show weakness. How do you know? Because I know what it's like to live with someone who wants to destroy you, someone who hurts you on purpose, someone who enjoys your pain. She paused. And you're not that person. You're nothing like that. Nate's free hand came up, cupped her face. His palm was rough, warm, real. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle, careful. You see the good in everything, even broken men. You're not broken. You're healing. His face moved closer. So are you. Their foreheads touched. Breath mingled. The rain fell outside. The world narrowed to this, to them, to this moment. Nate closed the distance. His lips brushed hers, soft, tentative, asking permission. Evie answered by leaning in. The kiss deepened. His hand slid into her hair, loosening the braid, tangling in the strands. Her hand found his chest. She could feel his heart pounding under her palm, racing, like hers. It was gentle. It was desperate. It was everything and nothing, like she'd imagined. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Nate rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you anything. I can't promise safety or certainty or even tomorrow, but I can promise you this. Whatever comes, we face it together. Evie's eyes filled, tears mixing with rain on her face. That's all I need. They kissed again, slower this time, taking their time, learning each other, memorizing this. When Maggie returned 20 minutes later, soaked and shivering, she found them sitting close, not touching, but the air between them had changed. She looked at them, shook her head. A small smile played at her lips. About damn time. The next morning, the rain stopped. The sun came out. Everything sparkled. They rode in comfortable silence. But now, when Evie looked at Nate, he looked back. When they stopped for water, their hands brushed. Small touches, brief, but intentional. Maggie watched, said nothing. But her eyes were knowing. That evening, they made camp near a stand of cottonwoods. The trees were old, gnarled. Their leaves rattled in the wind like dry paper, like whispered secrets. Nate was checking the pack mule when a sound made him stop. Hoofbeats, coming fast. He turned, hand going to his rifle, not drawing, not yet, just ready. A rider appeared, coming from the east, bent low over his horse's neck. The horse was lathered, foam at the mouth, foam on its neck, run hard, too hard. The rider pulled up 50 feet away, nearly fell out of the saddle, caught himself on the horn, stood swaying. He was young, maybe 25, black thin. Blood on his shirt. A lot of blood. Maggie gasped, dropped what she was holding, ran. Isaiah. She caught him as his legs gave out, lowered him to the ground. Her hands went to the blood, searching for the source. Isaiah, what happened? Who did this? The young man looked up. His face was gray, ashen, eyes wild with pain and fear. They're coming. Bounty hunters, maybe an hour behind, maybe less. Nate and Evie ran over. Nate knelt, examined the wound, a knife cut, long but not deep, across Isaiah's ribs. Painful but not fatal if they stopped the bleeding. How many? Isaiah coughed. Blood flecked his lips. 3, maybe 4. I lost count. Lost them in the dark. But they're coming. Why are they after you? Isaiah laughed, bitter, broken. Does it matter I'm black? I ran. That's enough reason for men like that. Maggie's face was stone. Tell me. Isaiah looked at her. His eyes were his sister's eyes. Same shape, same depth, same pain. There was a man, white man, foreman at the ranch where I was working near Fort Laramie. There was a girl, young, maybe 14. He was hurting her. In the barn. I heard her crying. I went in, tried to stop him. He swayed. Maggie steadied him. We fought. He fell, hit his head on a post. Hard. There was blood. I don't know if he died. I didn't stay to find out. I just ran. Maggie's jaw clenched. You did the right thing. Nate stood, looked east, toward where Isaiah had come from. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and orange, like fire, like blood. How far behind? Close. They stopped in that last town, about 20 miles back, asking questions, offering money for information. I had maybe an hour head start, but this... He gestured to his wound. This slowed me down. Nate turned to Evie and Maggie. We need to decide. Now. Maggie stood. Her face was hard. He's my brother, the only family I have left. I'm not leaving him. Nate nodded, like he'd expected that. Like there was no other answer. Then we make a stand. Evie felt her stomach drop. There's 3 of them. 3 of us. And Isaiah can barely stand. Nate checked his rifle. Smooth, practiced motions. Then we better be smart about it. They worked fast. Moved the cattle into the cottonwood grove, created a barrier between them and the open ground, positioned themselves behind the trees. Rifles ready. Isaiah sat propped against a trunk. Maggie had bandaged his side. Torn strips from her spare shirt. Wrapped them tight. The wound wasn't deep, but he'd lost blood. He was weak. The sun was setting, painting everything red. Then they came. 3 riders, just like Isaiah said. They rode slow, confident. Men used to getting their way, used to people backing down. They stopped at the edge of camp, looked at the cattle, at the trees, at Nate standing in front with his rifle across his chest. The lead rider was big, 6'3" at least, heavy. Face like weathered leather left too long in the sun. He wore a deputy's star pinned to his vest. Probably bought it, probably never earned it. His voice carried across the distance. We're looking for a fugitive, Isaiah Wells. Murder. Attempted murder at least. We have reason to believe he's here. Nate's voice was flat, empty of emotion. Don't know anyone by that name. The deputy smiled. Ugly. That's funny, because his horse is right there, still saddled, still sweating, still breathing hard. He pointed to Isaiah's horse, tied to a tree, proof impossible to deny. Nate didn't look, didn't need to. Still don't know anyone by that name. The deputy's smile faded. Don't make this difficult, friend. Hand him over. We'll be on our way. Nobody else needs to get hurt. Nate shifted his rifle, just slightly. Enough to make a point, I said. I don't know anyone by that name. The deputy's eyes narrowed. You interfering with the law? Nate's voice went cold. Colder than Evie had ever heard it. I don't see any law here. I see 3 men with guns and a star that probably came from a mail order catalog. That's not the same thing. One of the other riders spoke up. Younger, nervous. His hand kept twitching toward his gun. Come on, Collier. We know it's you. Word is you're driving cattle to Cheyenne. Word is you got 2 women with you. One white, one colored. He paused. Let that sink in. Word is the white woman might be worth something too. Evelyn Ashford. $500. Dead or alive. Killed her husband in Kansas. Stabbed him in his own home. Evie's blood turned to ice. The world tilted. They knew who she was. Knew what she'd done. Knew she was here. Nate didn't react. Didn't even blink. I don't know anyone by that name either. The deputy laughed. A sound like gravel scraping. You're harboring 2 fugitives. That makes you an accessory. You know what the penalty for that is? I know what the penalty for murder is. And I know you boys aren't planning on taking anyone alive. Too much trouble. Too much paperwork. Easier to shoot first and claim self-defense later. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun. Last chance, Collier. Hand them over. Both of them. And you can go on your way. No trouble, no fuss. Nate raised his rifle, not aiming directly. Not yet, just ready. Or what the standoff stretched. Seconds that felt like hours. Then Maggie stepped out from behind a tree, her rifle aimed square at the deputy's chest. Steady, unwavering. You want my brother, you go through me first. Evie emerged from another tree. Her rifle shook slightly, but she held it steady enough, aimed at the nervous rider. The deputy looked at them. 3 rifles, 3 people who clearly weren't backing down. He spat. Tobacco juice hit the dirt. This ain't over, Nate's voice was granite. You're right. It's not. Because if I see you again, if I even hear that you're within 10 miles of us, I won't wait for you to draw. I'll shoot first. And I'll sleep just fine afterward. We clear? The deputy's face went red. Veins stood out on his forehead. You threatening an officer of the law? Nate's finger moved to the trigger. I'm making a promise to 3 men who need to leave, now. The deputy stared. Then he jerked his reins. His horse spun. This ain't over, he said again. We know who you are now, all of you. There's a woman named Evelyn Ashford traveling with you. Killed her husband in Kansas. That makes you all accomplices. Murder accomplices. He pointed at Nate. When we come back, we're bringing a marshal, a real one, from Cheyenne. And then we'll see how tough you are. They rode off, dust rising behind them, fading into the twilight. When they were out of sight, Evie lowered her rifle. Her whole body started shaking, not just her hands, everything. Maggie caught her before she fell. Breathe, just breathe. Evie tried. Her chest was too tight. The air wouldn't come. They know who I am. They're going to come back. They're going to... Nate took the rifle from her, set it down carefully, took her shoulders, made her look at him, look at me. She couldn't. Her vision was swimming. Evie, look at me. She did. His eyes were steady, calm. We have 2 weeks to Cheyenne, maybe less if we push hard. That's 2 weeks to figure this out, 2 weeks to get ahead of them. But they'll come. You heard him. They're bringing a marshal. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. How can we... Maggie's voice cut through. Sharp. Did you kill your husband? Evie turned to her. I don't know. I stabbed him. He was choking me. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed the knife and... She couldn't finish. Maggie's voice softened. Was he hurting you? Before that night, Evie nodded. Tears streaming now. For how long? 7 years. Maggie looked at Nate, then at self-defense. Any judge with half a brain would see that. Nate's face was grim. Assuming we get to a judge, assuming those men don't catch us first, assuming the marshal from Cheyenne listens before shooting. He looked at Isaiah, still propped against the tree. "Can you ride?" Isaiah nodded weakly. "I can try." "Then we move. Tonight. Put as much distance between us and them as we can." "Where do we go?" Nate looked north, toward where Cheyenne waited, toward civilization, toward law, toward whatever came next. Cheyenne. "It's the only place with real law, real courts. It's our only shot." Evie's voice was small. "What if I don't make it? What if they catch me?" "Then they catch all of us," Nate said, "because we're not leaving you behind." Maggie nodded. "We stick together, all of us." Isaiah coughed. "You don't have to do this, any of you. This isn't your fight." Nate looked at him, then at Maggie, then at Evie. "It is now." They broke camp in darkness. No fire, no coffee, no time for anything except movement. Nate saddled horses. Maggie helped Isaiah mount. The young man swayed but held on. His face was gray in the starlight, but his jaw was set. Evie packed gear with shaking hands. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching herself from a distance, like this was happening to someone else, but it wasn't. It was happening to her. To all of them. They moved the herd north by starlight. It was dangerous. Cattle could fall, break legs, disappear into ravines, get lost in darkness, but staying was more dangerous. The bounty hunters would be back with more men, with a marshal, with authority and guns and the law on their side. They had to move. The cattle were nervous, sensing the tension, the urgency. They lowed softly, plaintive sounds in the darkness. Evie rode drag, behind the herd, watching for stragglers. Her eyes strained against the darkness, trying to see shapes that weren't there, trying to count animals she couldn't see. Nate rode point, leading them north, following stars, following instinct, following hope. Maggie and Isaiah rode the flanks. Isaiah swayed in his saddle, but he stayed on, stayed conscious, stayed moving. By dawn, they'd put 15 miles between themselves and the Cottonwood Grove. By noon, 20. By dusk, 25. They made camp in a low valley, sheltered, hidden. No fire again, too risky. Isaiah was fading. The ride had reopened his wound. Blood seeped through Maggie's bandages. She changed them by moonlight, her hands steady despite the darkness. Evie sat beside Nate. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, weighted with things unsaid. Finally, Nate broke it. "I need to tell you something." Evie waited. "What I said before. About my wife. About the town blaming me. That wasn't entirely true." She turned to look at him. His face was shadowed. "Hard to read. They did blame me, but they tried to arrest me. For murder. Said I'd driven Sarah to suicide. Said it was the same as killing her myself." Evie's breath caught. "The sheriff came to my house 3 days after I buried her, came with 2 deputies, said there'd been complaints, said people had seen bruises on Sarah, said they had testimony that I'd been cruel." He paused. "It was all lies. I never touched Sarah except with love, never raised my hand, never raised my voice. But the truth didn't matter. People had decided, and once people decide, facts don't change minds. What did you do?" "I ran. Left the ranch, left everything, the house, the land, the graves. Became this. A man who drives other people's cattle because I can't go home to my own land." His voice broke. "So when I say I understand being accused of something you didn't do, when I say I know what it's like to run, I mean it. I've been running for 3 years, and I'm tired." Evie took his hand. "Then maybe it's time we both stopped running. Maybe it's time we stood and fought." Nate looked at her. "You're willing to risk that, risk a trial." Risk losing, risk hanging. Evie thought about Kansas, about Thomas, about 7 years of fear and pain and silence, about becoming smaller and quieter and less until she almost disappeared completely, about Maggie standing up to those men, about Nate defending her when he didn't have to, about the calf that lived because she refused to let it die. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing to risk it, because I'm more afraid of running forever than I am of fighting and losing." Nate pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Then we fight." Maggie approached, sat down beside them. "Isaiah's stable. The bleeding stopped. He'll live, but he needs rest, real rest, more than a few hours." Nate nodded. "We're 2 weeks from Cheyenne. Maybe less if we push. We can make it." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, then she spoke. "When we get there, I'm leaving, taking Isaiah north, to Canada." Evie started to protest. Maggie held up a hand. This is your fight. And Nate's. You're going to court, going to face this legal. That's the right choice for you. That's the brave choice. She paused. But it's not the right choice for Isaiah. For us. The law doesn't protect people like us. It hunts us. It uses us. It breaks us. Her voice was firm. So we run. And we keep running until we find a place that's safe. If that place exists. Evie's eyes filled. I'm going to miss you. Maggie smiled. Small, sad. I'm going to miss you too. But what we've had these weeks, this was good. This mattered. You matter. She reached out, took Evie's hand. You saved that calf, carried it for miles when everyone said to leave it, refused to let it die. That's who you are. A fighter, a survivor. Don't forget that when things get hard, I won't. Maggie squeezed her hand once, released it. And when you win, because you will win, you write to me. General Delivery. Winnipeg. Let me know you're safe. I will. I promise. The three of them sat in darkness. The cattle breathed around them. Above them the night sky stretched infinite. Stars bright as diamonds scattered across black velvet. Tomorrow they would ride. The day after they would ride again. Toward Cheyenne, toward courts and marshals and truth, toward whatever came next. But tonight they were together. Three people who'd found each other in wilderness, who'd stood side by side when the world came calling, who'd learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when everyone else runs. Evie fell asleep with her head on Nate's shoulder. Maggie kept watch. Isaiah slept fitfully, and in the darkness, miles behind them, three men made plans. The chase was far from over. On the 30th day the storm came, not rain, lightning. Evie woke to electricity in the air, that sharp ozone smell that made her teeth ache, made her skin prickle, made every hair stand on end. The sky flickered, white and jagged, branching across the darkness like tree roots growing upside down. No thunder. That was wrong. Lightning and thunder were partners. One without the other meant something dangerous, something close. Nate was already up. Get your horse. Now. Evie didn't ask questions, just pulled on her boots, grabbed her saddle. Ran for Rosie. The mare was spooked, whites showing around her eyes, nostrils flared. She danced sideways when Evie approached. Easy, easy, girl. Evie talked low, soothing. Got the bridle on, the saddle. Cinched it tight with fumbling fingers. The cattle were awake. All of them. Standing instead of lying. Heads turned toward the lightning. Ears forward. Bodies tense. Waiting. Evie swung into the saddle. The sky lit up again. Closer this time. The lightning forked again. Turned night into noon for 3 heartbeats. The cattle bolted. Not in any direction that made sense. Just away. Away from the light. Away from the smell of burned air. Away from whatever instinct told them was coming. 80 head moving as one. A wave of muscle and horn and panic. Evie kicked Rosie hard. The mare lunged forward. They chased the herd, tried to get ahead, tried to turn them. But turning a stampede is like trying to turn a river with your bare hands. Impossible. The world narrowed to movement and sound. Hooves pounding, ground shaking, cattle bellowing, her own breath coming fast and shallow. She couldn't see Nate, couldn't see Maggie or Isaiah, couldn't see anything but shapes in the darkness between lightning strikes. Dark shapes running, dark ground rushing beneath her, dark sky pressing down like a hand. A cow veered left. Evie followed, cut it off before it could split farther from the main herd. Rosie was good at this, better than Evie. The mare knew where to be, how to move, how to anticipate. Evie just held on. Another lightning strike. So close Evie felt the heat of it, felt the air split, smelled burning sage and something else, something sharp and metallic. The cattle scattered wider, groups of 3, groups of 5, breaking apart like water thrown against stone. Evie went after a group of 4, pushed them back toward where she thought the main herd might be. The main herd wasn't there anymore. Just more darkness, more scattered cattle, more lightning turning everything white and black and white again. Rosie stumbled. Not bad, just a hoof catching on something. A rock, a hole. The mare recovered instantly, kept running. But Evie's balance was wrong. She was leaning too far forward, compensating for the stumble. She tried to sit back, tried to center herself, Another cow appeared, directly in front of them, too close to avoid. Rosie veered hard left. Evie's grip slipped. She felt herself falling, tilting, the ground rushing up. She tried to catch herself, tried to grab mane, tried to do anything. Then, impact. The world exploded in pain and darkness. She woke to agony. Her head, her shoulder, her ribs, everything hurt with a sharpness that made breathing difficult. She was lying on the ground, rocks digging into her back, sky above her, still flickering with lightning but farther away now. The storm moving east. How long had she been out? Minutes, hours. She tried to sit up. Her vision swam. Nausea rolled through her in waves. Evie. Nate's voice. Close, urgent, afraid. She turned her head. Mistake. The world spun. Don't move. His hands were on her, checking her head, her neck, her arms. Gentle but thorough. Where does it hurt? Everywhere. He almost smiled. That's good. Means you're alive. Means nothing's broken clean through. What happened? You fell. Rosie's fine. We need to see if you can move. He helped her sit up. Slow. Careful. Supporting her weight. Her head pounded like someone was hitting it with a hammer. Her shoulders screamed, but nothing felt broken. Can you stand? She tried. Her legs shook like a newborn calf's, but they held. Nate kept one arm around her, supporting her. The lightning was moving away. Dawn was coming, gray light at the edges of the sky. The cattle scattered. We'll find them when the sun's up, but first we need to get you somewhere safe. He led her to a small grove of trees. Maggie was there. And Isaiah. They'd made a rough shelter, blankets strung between branches. Maggie took one look at Evie and swore. She's hurt. She's alive, Nate corrected. Maggie helped Evie lie down, checked her pupils, her pulse, her breathing, ran expert hands over her ribs. Possible concussion, definitely bruised. Maybe cracked ribs, but she'll live. Nothing a few weeks won't heal. Evie tried to laugh. It hurt too much. The cattle Maggie's face was grim. We'll count when the sun's up. But we lost some. Don't know how many yet. As the sun rose, painting the Wyoming sky pink and gold, they found out. 68 head, 12 missing, 12 animals worth $240. $240 Nate needed. $240 that were gone, scattered or dead or lost forever in the darkness. Nate stood in the middle of the gathered herd, his jaw tight, his eyes distant, doing calculations in his head, weighing options, measuring loss. Evie walked to him. Every step hurt, but she walked, refused to show weakness, refused to be one more thing he had to worry about. She put her hand on his arm. We saved 68. He didn't look at her. I needed 80, needed the money from 80, needed every dollar to make this work. But we have 68. That's 68 that could have scattered so far we'd never find them. 68 that could have run off a cliff or broken legs or gotten torn up in the dark. Nate finally looked at her. You almost died last night. But I didn't. I'm here. And so are you. And so are 68 head of cattle that need to get to Cheyenne. His expression cracked, just slightly, enough to show the man underneath the stone. The money from 68 won't be enough. Won't cover the ranch. Won't cover starting over. Won't cover anything. Then we figure something else out, Evie said. But we don't quit. Not now. Not when we're this close. Nate stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. All right, we keep going. Maggie cleared her throat. There's something else. The calf. The one Evie saved. It's fine. Stayed with the herd the whole time. That little fighter didn't run off like the others. Stayed close to Rosie. Evie felt warmth spread through her chest despite the pain. See? Even the calf knows not to quit. They reached Cheyenne 7 days later. The town appeared on the horizon like a promise, like civilization, like the end of something and the beginning of something else. Buildings, real buildings, not just wood shacks, but actual structures. 2 stories, 3 stories, brick and stone and glass windows. Streets, actual streets with boardwalks and hitching posts and people walking like they had somewhere to be. The railroad station with its tall smokestack. Black smoke rising into the pale blue sky, the sound of trains, the whistle, the clank of metal on metal. Evie had forgotten what civilization looked like, sounded like, smelled like. They drove the 68 head to the stockyards, penned them, waited for the buyers. The buyers came. Men in suits, clean suits, too clean for this work. They walked through the cattle, making notes in little books, calculating weights, assessing value. They offered less than market value. The cattle had lost weight on the trail. The storm had left them gaunt, ribs showing, eyes hollow. Nate argued, quietly, firmly, stated facts, stated distances, stated circumstances. They gave a little, not much, just enough to make it seem like negotiation instead of charity. In the end, Nate took what he could get, $1,200 for 6 weeks of work, for 68 cattle, for everything they'd been through. It wasn't what he'd hoped for, but it was something. It was enough to start over. Maybe. Nate divided the money, fair and equal, like he'd promised, gave Maggie her share, $42, 6 weeks at $1 a day, gave Isaiah his, $42, for helping even while wounded, gave Evie hers, $42. More money than she'd ever held at once. She held the bills. They felt real, solid, proof that she'd worked, that she'd earned, that she had value. "What will you do?" Maggie asked Nate. He looked at the remaining money in his hand, did calculations, measured hope against reality, find work, save up, maybe buy some land of my own someday, start over. She nodded. "And you?" Maggie looked at Isaiah. "Then north, toward Canada, toward hope, toward maybe. We leave tonight, before anyone asks questions, before anyone connects us to those bounty hunters." Evie felt her throat tighten. Maggie turned to her, pulled her into a hug, fierce, brief. The first real physical affection they'd shared. "You fight. You hear me. You fight and you win. I will." Maggie released her, turned to Nate. "You take care of her with my life." Maggie smiled, small, sad. "I believe you." She and Isaiah mounted their horses, turned north, rode away without looking back. Evie watched them until they disappeared, until she couldn't see them anymore, until they were just memories. Then she turned to Nate. "I'm ready." He took her hand. "Then let's go find a marshal." The marshal's office was a square building on Main Street, wood, 2 stories, solid, official. A sign above the door that read, "Law Office" in proud letters. They walked in together. A man sat behind a desk, 50 maybe, gray hair cut military short, hard eyes that had seen things, a badge pinned to his vest. Real, not bought, earned. "Help you," Nate stepped forward. "I'm here with Evelyn Ashford. She'd like to turn herself in." The marshal's eyes sharpened. Recognition flickered. Evelyn Ashford. The woman from Kansas. Evie found her voice. Yes, the marshal stood, walked around the desk, studied her face, not judging, just assessing. "You know there's a warrant for your arrest, murder charges out of Topeka, I know. You know you could hang Evie's pulse hammered." But her voice was steady. "I know, but I didn't murder anyone. I defended myself." The marshal was quiet. Then he pulled out a chair. "Sit. Tell me your story." Evie sat. Nate stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Solid, real, grounding. She told everything. The wedding at 21, young and naive and believing in love. Thomas Ashford, Marshal of Topeka, respected, trusted, handsome in his uniform, the first time he hit her. 6 months into the marriage. Because dinner was late. Because she'd spoken when he wanted silence. Because he could. The years after. The escalation. Slaps became punches. Punches became choking. Choking became worse. Became threats. Became terror the night she tried to leave. Packing in secret, hiding money, planning escape. The way his hand had gone to her throat. The way she couldn't breathe. The way the world went gray. The knife. The blood. The running. She told it all, her voice breaking in places. But she didn't stop. Didn't hold back. Didn't minimize. Didn't apologize. When she finished, the room was silent. The marshal sat back, rubbed his face, thought, "That's quite a story. It's the truth. Maybe, maybe not. But it's not up to me to decide. That's for a judge and jury." He stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out papers, forms of official documents. "I'm going to have to hold you, put you in a cell, until we can arrange a trial." Evie's stomach dropped. But she'd known this was coming. Nate stepped forward. She turned herself in. She's not running. Doesn't that count for something? It does. But the law is the law. She's charged with murder. I can't just let her walk around free. For how long? The marshal checked a calendar on his desk. Circuit judge comes through once a month. You're in luck. He's due next week. Evie stood. All right, I understand. The marshal led her to the back, to a row of cells. 3 of them, empty. He opened one. She walked in. The door clanged shut behind her. The sound of finality. Nate gripped the bars, his knuckles white. I'll find you a lawyer, the best one I can afford. Evie tried to smile. With what money? With whatever it takes. I'll sell everything, work double, do whatever I have to. The marshal cleared his throat. Visiting hours end at 6. You'll need to leave soon. Nate didn't move, didn't let go of the bars. I'll be back tomorrow, every day, until this is over. Evie put her hand over his through the bars. I know. He left, reluctant, looking back 3 times before he finally walked out the door. Evie sat on the narrow cot, looked at the walls, the bars, the small window high up that let in a square of sky. She'd chosen this, chosen to stop running, chosen to fight. Now she had to live with that choice. The next 6 days blurred together. Nate visited every day, brought food from the hotel, brought news from the outside world, brought hope wrapped in determination. He'd found a lawyer, a woman, Mrs. Adelaide Harris, 50 years old, one of the only female lawyers in Wyoming, fierce, smart, experienced. She'd agreed to take the case. She believes in justice, Nate said your story deserves to be heard. On the 4th day, Mrs. Harris visited. She was tall, gray hair pulled back severe, no nonsense, eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from Evie in the small visiting room, pulled out a notebook. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. Don't try to make it sound better than it was. Just truth. Evie told her story again, every detail, every bruise, every broken promise. Every time she'd believed Thomas when he said he'd change, when he said he loved her, when he said it was her fault. Mrs. Harris took notes. When Evie finished, the lawyer set down her pen. This won't be easy. Your husband is a marshal, respected. The burden of proof will be on us to show he was abusive, to show you acted in self-defense. Evie nodded. I understand. Do you have any witnesses? Anyone who saw the abuse, no. He was always careful, always made sure no one saw. That's how men like him work. Mrs. Harris tapped her pen against the notebook. Then we'll have to rely on your testimony and on character witnesses. We'll put Mr. Collier on the stand. Let him tell the jury what he saw. The fear, the bruises, the way you flinched. Will that be enough? Mrs. Harris met her eyes. Honestly, I don't know, but it's what we have. So we make it work. On the 7th day, everything changed. Evie was in her cell, reading a book Nate had brought, when the marshal appeared. You have a visitor. Nate. It's not visiting hours yet. Not Nate. The marshal's face was grim. It's your husband, Thomas Ashford. He's here. Evie's blood turned to ice. The book fell from her hands. I don't want to see him. You don't have a choice. He has a legal right. He's your husband. No, please. But the marshal was already unlocking the cell. 5 minutes, that's all. I'll be right outside. He led her to the visiting room, sat her down, then walked out, left her alone. The door opened. Thomas Ashford walked in. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, blonde hair perfectly combed, blue eyes cold as winter. Handsome in a way that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her stomach turn. The only difference was the scar on his shoulder, where the knife had gone in, visible through his shirt. A reminder. He was alive. She hadn't killed him. Relief and terror flooded through her in equal measure. Thomas sat down across from her, his face unreadable. Evelyn. His voice was soft, almost gentle. The tone that used to make her skin crawl. She didn't respond, didn't give him anything. You've led me on quite a chase. 6 weeks, 300 miles. Do you know how hard I've been looking for you? He leaned forward, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd always worn. But I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to offer you something. A way out of this mess you've made. Evie's voice came out hoarse. What, I'm dropping the charges, telling the marshal it was all a misunderstanding, that you were confused, frightened, that you didn't mean to hurt me. He paused. Let that sink in. You'll be free to go. No trial, no conviction, no hanging. Evie stared at him. In exchange for what? In exchange for coming home, coming back to Kansas, being my wife again, being who you're supposed to be. Her stomach turned. No. Thomas's face hardened, the mask slipping. No, I'd rather hang. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. I'd rather die free than live as your prisoner. Thomas stood, walked to the window, looked out at Cheyenne, at freedom, at everything she wanted. When he turned back, his expression had changed completely. The mask was gone. What remained was cold, cruel, true, fine. Then you'll get your trial, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. Violent, unstable, a liar, a whore. He leaned close. His voice dropped to a whisper. You think they'll believe you over me? I'm a marshal, respected, trusted. You're nothing. You're a woman who stabbed her husband and ran. You'll hang Evelyn, and I'll be there to watch. He walked to the door, knocked. Think about my offer. You have until the trial starts. Then he was gone. Evie sat there, not shaking this time, just still, just cold. Underneath the fear, something else was growing. Anger. She'd carried a calf for 12 miles. She'd ridden through lightning storms. She'd stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. She wasn't going to break now, not for Thomas, not for anyone. The trial began 2 days later. The courtroom was packed, people she didn't know, all there to watch, to judge, to see a woman on trial for her life. Thomas sat in the front row, his lawyer beside him. He looked calm, confident, like he'd already won. Evie sat at the defendant's table, Mrs. Harris on her left, Nate behind her in the gallery. His presence a constant reassurance. The judge entered, an older man, white beard, sharp eyes that had seen everything. All rise. Everyone stood. The charges were read. Murder in the first degree. Evelyn Ashford, accused of stabbing Thomas Ashford with intent to kill. How does the defendant plead? Mrs. Harris stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Self-defense. The trial proceeded. Thomas took the stand first. His testimony was measured, calm, practiced. He painted a picture of a troubled wife, a woman prone to hysteria, to violence. He showed the scar on his shoulder. The jury leaned forward, looked. Yes, we had arguments. What married couple doesn't? But I never raised a hand to her, never hurt her. The night she stabbed me, we'd had a disagreement. Nothing serious. I turned my back. And she attacked. His voice broke convincingly. I still don't understand why. Mrs. Harris cross-examined hard. Asked why he waited 2 weeks to report the crime. Asked why he hadn't pursued his wife immediately if he was so concerned. Thomas had answers for everything. Practiced, smooth, but they rang hollow to anyone listening carefully. Then Evie took the stand. She told her story. All of it. The years of abuse, the escalation, the night she fought back. Her voice shook, but she didn't break. When the prosecution cross-examined, they hammered her, asked why she didn't leave sooner, why she didn't seek help. Evie looked at the jury, at 12 faces, 12 strangers who would decide her fate, because he was the law. Who would I tell? Who would believe me? Would you have believed me? The courtroom was silent. Nate took the stand last. He described finding Evie that first night, the bruises, the fear, the way she'd flinched when he moved too fast. Described 6 weeks on the trail. The strength she'd shown, the determination. The way she'd carried a dying calf for 12 miles because she refused to give up on something helpless. She's not a violent person. She's a survivor. And there's a difference. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, Evie could barely breathe. The foreman stood. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have your honor. In the case of the Territory versus Evelyn Ashford, on the charge of murder in the first degree, how do you find? The courtroom held its breath. We find the defendant not guilty. Evie's knees buckled. Nate caught her from behind the rail. Not guilty, free. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Ashford, you are free to go. However, I must note that your marriage to Thomas Ashford remains legally valid. You will need to petition for divorce through the proper channels. Evie barely heard him. She was free. Outside the courthouse, Nate pulled her into his arms. "You did it. We did it." Thomas appeared on the courthouse steps, looked at them. His face was stone. "This isn't over, Evelyn. You're still my wife, and I'll fight any divorce petition you file, for years if I have to." "Then you'll fight," Evie said, her voice steady. "But I'm not afraid of you anymore." Thomas stared at her. Then he turned and walked away. Nate squeezed her hand. What now? Now? Evie looked at the town, at the mountains in the distance, at the sky stretching endless and blue. Now I live, really live, for the first time in 8 years. 6 months later. Evie stood in front of a small schoolhouse on the edge of Cheyenne. Children's voices drifted through the open windows. Laughter, learning, life. She'd found work as a teacher. The pay wasn't much, but it was hers, earned through her own effort. The divorce petition was filed. Thomas was fighting it, just like he'd promised. It would take time, maybe years. But Evie could wait. Nate rode up, dismounted, walked to her. He'd found work on a ranch north of town, came to visit every few weeks when he could. "Any news?" Evie shook her head. Thomas's lawyer filed another delay. Nate's jaw tightened. "We'll keep fighting." "I know." They walked together, away from the schoolhouse, toward the open land beyond town. "I got a letter from Maggie," Evie said. "She and Isaiah made it to Canada. They've got land, a small farm. She says it's hard, but it's theirs." Nate stopped, turned to face her. "I don't know how long this will take, the divorce, the waiting. It could be years before we can marry." Evie looked up at him. "Then we wait. I've waited 8 years to feel safe. I can wait a few more to make it official." She took his hand. "Besides, I don't need a piece of paper to know what we are, what we have. What's that choice? We choose this, every day. That's more real than any certificate." Nate pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "I choose you. I choose you too." They stood there as the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and gold. The wind picked up, carried the smell of sage and possibility. Evie thought about the woman who'd appeared at the edge of a firelight 6 months ago, broken, terrified, running. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival isn't about running faster. It's about knowing when to stop, when to turn, when to fight. Someone who'd carried a calf through miles of desert and refused to let it die. Someone who'd ridden through lightning storms and stood back up after falling. Someone who'd faced her abuser in court and won. Not because she was fearless, but because she'd learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. The sun touched the horizon. The sky blazed. Nate's hand was warm in hers. This was enough. This moment, this choice, this man who'd stood beside her when he didn't have to. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The divorce battle would drag on. People would talk. Society would judge. But tonight, under the darkening Wyoming sky, Evelyn Ashford was free. Free to choose. Free to love. Free to build a life worth living. And that was everything.